Hey everyone, so I am here with chapter 12, the correct chapter this time. I apologize for the mistake on Tuesday, and this is about handling potential challenges in an ELL classroom. The intro to this chapter started with a Norwegian folktale that was about facing the problems of how to cut down an unchoppable tree and to dig an undiggable well. Throughout the folktale, he figures out the solutions through these challenges by taking the time to wonder about the questions and then going out and finding their answers. And that is how he ended up being successful. So it also mentions that the solutions to challenges are by taking time to wonder about them, having those reflections, and then those reflections leading to thinking outside of the box for your answers. So I know that as teachers, we kind of promote thinking outside of the box, and this is kind of how the intro wants us to think as teachers. Whether I know normally we're talking about our students thinking outside of the box, but when we have our own problems, we also need to think outside of the box. And then how thinking leads to solutions that make your work easier. This part of the chapter also mentions that going to school shouldn't be a place where young people go to watch older people work. So when a student is having a challenge, you need to kind of, instead of helping them, being the older person doing the work, you need to watch them go and do the work. The chapter then divided itself up by common classroom challenges, and the first one that they mention is student motivation. So they're saying that a teacher is never the one that should be motivating the student. The student should be so engaged and eager to work with you that they should have their own intrinsic motivation. So that's the motivation within themselves versus extrinsic, which is motivated by grades. So it's basically just falling back in engagement. And they say that student motivation can be built through positive relationships with the teacher and the student. A supportive classroom atmosphere. You always want to be communicative and comfortable with the students. You need to make it a safe place to be. Enhancing autonomy through providing choices, and autonomy, if you're not sure, is just kind of basically independence through education. And you can enhance that by giving them homework options, letting them sit wherever they want, praising their effort versus ability. And their example with that would be saying, you pronounced the dialogue very clearly. All that time you spent practicing really paid off. Instead of saying, your English is great. So kind of explicitly showing the effort versus instead of what they actually were able to do. Having students set their own goals and then kind of following up on the goals that they set. Using 30 seconds of visualization or imagery of how they're going to work toward their goals or how they are working toward their goals, and kind of visualizing achieving their goals. And you can do that daily or a couple times a week when you're having a certain new skill brought to the table. Next, they mention textbook integration, which is always a kind of debatable thing on how much we should use a textbook with our students, whether we're in an ELL classroom or not. But they mention in the book that you should see a textbook as a cookbook, meaning you should pick the right things for appropriate occasions, and then they really focus on the textbook being a turnover in the mind. So they think to be an amazing teacher, if we're all learning how to be, you need to look at that option and be able to see in your mind, okay, what do I want to use, what do I not want to use, and kind of like use the book and make your own judgment with your own skills and experience. Overall in this section, they didn't really seem too fond of using a textbook in general, but they say that if you are a stickler or if where you work is kind of strict and you need to use a textbook, you should use it as a framework for your class. Identify places within the textbook on where you need to include more engaging teaching strategies, so you kind of have to go through and be the dictator on the textbook. And then it mentions ways that you can make it more engaging by personalizing the textbook dialogues, and not just by changing a student's name, but the entire experience, because a lot of the students in ELL classrooms can't really relate to the dialogues within a textbook. Turning the passages into read-alouds and think-alouds, downloading the supplemental materials that often come with textbooks, which usually consist of a lot of games, and using the companion websites, knowing that you're not alone there in the textbook. There are a lot of other options that come with textbooks that you should integrate. Next was error correction, and that brings up an always controversial debate on whether recasts are beneficial or hindering oral communication skills. And just to review what recasts are, if a student were to say something incorrectly out loud, you repeat it back to them in kind of in a suggested voice, say it the right way, and usually they'll be like, okay, I said that wrong, and then they kind of repeat what you said to try and practice the way they say it. A lot of people think that's hindering the oral communication skills because they believe that language acquisition is solely about communicating and the urge and the need to practice communicating, and they fear that by correcting students all the time like that, it'll shy them away from talking out loud and have them be fearful of making mistakes constantly, and they believe it should be a fluid process where they're not fearful and are just constantly practicing. But the book mentions how important it is to have some sort of correction within the classroom, and how games that have students correct the common grammar goals are often fun for them. Recasts and dialogue journals, so having them perform the recasts. One thing that I've actually done in general education classrooms is having them making the teacher a paper that's full of the teacher's mistakes, and having the students fix the errors. That's a really fun one that they like because it allows them to see that teachers make mistakes too. And several positive aspects of written work. You want, whenever they have written work completed, you want to focus on several positive aspects and then focus on only one type of error. So then they're given a lot more positivity rather than just grading a paper and seeing a bunch of red pen all over it. And then you also want to go over their written work with them in a private conversation. And if you notice a common error trend within the class on their written work, do a short mini lesson to kind of really explicitly teach that to them. Then another potential problem that they point out is limited access to technology. Their main focus is that technology is just a tool. One shouldn't need technology to be a good teacher. It's just there to have a benefit and a positive impact on the language learning, but to be a great teacher, you shouldn't need that to make things exciting and beneficial. But if you do have some sort of technology, so if you have one computer and maybe one projector, some of the things they suggest would be online karaoke sites where the students have to fill in missing lyrics. They can do that at their seats while you play the projector. Same with grammar games. They could use dry erase boards, work in small groups. And then animated stories. They're always able to be played with one computer. If you have a couple computers, they suggest using small groups, or maybe working in pairs, so that's your own kind of selective grouping based on your knowledge of your students. If you have a little bit more computers, holding the free reading time, allowing them to go to the computers to read when they have extra time, and focusing on using the headphones so it won't distract everyone else. And then if you don't have anything, transparencies and overhead projectors are just as good as computers. Take it old school. And then I have a link down there for the bottom, at the bottom, if you, in your future classroom, want to check that out. It says in the book that they often grant funds for purchases on there, so go ahead and check that out. Pretty interesting. Then I was really glad that they mentioned multi-level classes. As a lot of you probably already know from doing clinical already, this is a very common challenge that's in an ELL classroom. And then it kind of focuses back on textbooks for part of it. It's really hard to use one type of textbooks when you have multi-leveled students in one classroom. So they suggest you could either divide the class into two and work together on that. One textbook, you could have two different textbooks, or two separate curriculums perhaps. You can kind of do it that way if you can't really divide the class up like that. But they do mention working together is usually a better type of way, but I can understand why they wouldn't be able to do that. But if you are able to work together and have the class as a whole, they focus on unified themes. With one theme, it's really easy to be a primary goal, and it's easy to modify it, and that's just skills as teachers that we need to really focus on a lot, even in the general ed classroom. With the classroom working together as a whole, it allows for authentic teachers, meaning the students. So with students who are above levels, surrounded by students that are in lower levels, they're able to kind of be that peer that helps other students. They're able to practice their English by aiding other students, talking with them, showing them the correct grammar concepts, and overall that's research proves that that's the best way to learn is to teach. So really cool that that would be able to happen in your classroom. And it exposes progressing beginners to more challenging learning tasks more quickly. So that's not just beneficial for the higher up students, it's beneficial for the lower students, kind of pushing them, but pushing them with a helper along, so it's not as scary. One thing you need to focus on with doing the multi-level class as a whole is effective assessment, both formative and summative. And formative is kind of like small little tests that focus on individual skills, and summative is overall, so it would be like a unit test. And then they suggest ways that you can kind of divide up. So you would have whole class, similar ability groups for certain lessons, and then mixed ability partner groups. And then other ways that you can differentiate is through computer lab work, homework, peer tutors, dialogue journals, and graphic organisms. Then another controversial discussion is the students' use of their native language in the classroom. So research in the chapter shows that careful and strategic use of L1 through a translation by teacher, peer tutor, bilingual aid, or assistance from students themselves can help ELLs, particularly with grammar concepts, vocabulary, instruction, and student-teacher relationships, or even peer relationships. They suggest that, however, even though you're allowing some use of L1 in your classroom, it's more about being accepting of it and just not being a dictator and saying absolutely not. They suggest having an English-only time that you let the students be aware of when you're doing it, and having limited restrictions on the L1 during the case, and only using it when you're aiding only having the L1 at certain times in the classroom will aid in students respecting this rule. They also suggest sharing with students the research and request that L1 solely be used to help each other understand the English. So the research showing that it helps to use it, but only whenever you're trying to understand the English. Then, as you know, classroom management is always a major challenge with students. They actually suggest something controversial where they say don't use incentives and rewards. They mention this because they suggest that it would allow the student to kind of get stuck in the routine of receiving constant rewards, so they suggest only use it when it's absolutely necessary. Using positive framed messages, you already know that we should always be praising our students. Emphasizing what the students can do, basically limiting the word no, being courteous, showing being a good role model, saying please and thank you, and staying calm in hectic situations. And then having student book selection. So offer suggested guidelines when students are picking a book. Make sure your topic is of interest. Do a walkthrough first to ensure the vocab is at level. Sorry about that typo. Decide. And then, if you decide against it, return it, find a replacement. They also have a cool way of determining what is challenging, and I'll type that out for you and send it to you. It's been enough time. And then, often taking 2 copies home one in English and one in your primary language to try and compare and learning those advanced levels of a new book. And then I ran out of time, so go ahead and you can kind of discuss this in class if you have time. Thank you.